Let me tell you about my friend Marcus. This guy spent 2 entire years chasing the same woman. 2 years of good morning texts, surprise coffee deliveries, remembering every detail she mentioned, being her emotional support through breakups with other guys. He was convinced that if he just showed her how much he cared, how available he was, how different he was from those other guys, she'd finally see his worth. Then one day, she introduced him to her new boyfriend, a guy she'd met exactly 2 weeks earlier at a random party. Marcus was devastated. He couldn't understand it. "I gave her everything," he told me. "I was always there for her." That's when I realized something that changed everything I thought I knew about attraction. The very thing Marcus thought would win her over, his constant attention, his availability, his devotion, was exactly what killed any chance he ever had. If you're watching this video, chances are you've been exactly where Marcus was. Maybe you're there right now. You've poured your heart out to someone, made them your priority, been the guy who always responds within minutes, who drops everything when they need you. You've been the perfect gentleman, the supportive friend, the guy who gets it. And what did you get in return? Left on red? Ghosted after months of daily conversations? Told you're such a good friend while she dates guys who barely text her back? You've watched her complain about men who treat her poorly while she ignores the man, you, who would treat her like a queen. It's frustrating, isn't it? You follow all the advice about being respectful, being present, showing your feelings. You think you're doing everything right. Society tells you that's what women want. A man who communicates, who's emotionally available, who makes them feel special. But here's the brutal truth every time you double text, every time you're available at her convenience, every time you prioritize her over your own life, you're not building attraction, you're destroying it. And the worst part, nobody explains why this happens. Nobody tells you that your biggest strength, your ability to care deeply, becomes your biggest weakness when you don't understand female psychology. You're not broken. You're not doing anything morally wrong, but you are missing something crucial about how attraction actually works. And that missing piece isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about understanding a fundamental truth that most men never learn. 5 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. I spent half a decade studying female psychology, diving deep into behavioral science, and combining it with ancient Stoic philosophy to understand what actually creates lasting attraction. I've worked with hundreds of men, from CEOs to college students, helping them transform from the guys who get overlooked to the men women can't stop thinking about. This isn't about manipulation. It's not about playing hard to get or using pickup artist tactics. It's about understanding the psychological principles that govern human attraction and learning to embody the qualities that make you genuinely irresistible. What I'm about to share with you goes against everything you've been told about dating and relationships. It's going to challenge your beliefs about what women want. But more importantly, it's going to give you the tools to become the kind of man who doesn't chase because he doesn't need to. The strategies I'm sharing aren't just theory. They're field-tested, proven principles that work because they're based on how our brains are actually wired. When you understand these principles, you'll never look at attraction the same way again. Today, I'm going to break down the 15 psychological principles of detachment that will completely transform how women see you. These aren't just dating tips. They're a blueprint for becoming the kind of man who commands respect, who creates curiosity, who becomes unforgettable. We'll start with why she craves what she can't control, then move through the psychology of scarcity, the power of emotional unavailability, and why neediness destroys attraction at a cellular level. You'll learn why uncertainty triggers obsession, how to reverse the control dynamics, and why becoming irreplaceable has nothing to do with how much you give. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the men who seem to put in the least effort often get the most attention. You'll know exactly how to shift from being the guy she takes for granted to the one she can't replace. But here's what's going to blow your mind. This transformation isn't about changing who you are. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. Ready, let's dive in. Point 1. She craves what she can't. Let me paint you two pictures. Picture Jake. He's the guy who responds to her texts within seconds, always available for last-minute plans, drops everything when she calls. He thinks he's being the perfect boyfriend material. But here's what actually happens. She starts taking longer to reply, cancels plans more often, and eventually tells him she needs space. Now picture David. When she texts, he responds when it fits his schedule. Sometimes that's an hour, sometimes it's the next day. He has hobbies, friends, goals that don't revolve around her. When she suggests hanging out, he checks his calendar first. I'm free Thursday, but not this weekend. I've got plans. Guess which one she can't stop thinking about? I used to be Jake. I thought being available 24/7 showed how much I cared. But here's the brutal truth I learned: when you're always available, you become wallpaper. You're just there, expected, taken for granted. David represents something she can't control: his time, his attention, his energy. And that drives her crazy in the best possible way. She starts wondering, what's he doing? Who's he with? Why isn't he texting me back? Have you ever noticed how the guys who seem least interested often get the most attention? Here's what's happening in her mind, and this is where it gets fascinating. Every woman, consciously or unconsciously, tests the men in her life. She's not doing it to be mean. It's hardwired into female psychology. She needs to know, can I control this man's emotions? Can I predict his behavior? Does he need me more than I need him? When you respond immediately every time, when you rearrange your life around her schedule, when you get upset if she doesn't text back quickly, you're failing these tests. You're showing her that your emotional state depends on her actions. and that's when attraction dies. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. For thousands of years, women needed partners who could handle uncertainty, who wouldn't fall apart under pressure, who had their own mission and purpose. A man who can be easily controlled doesn't feel safe or attractive. He feels weak. This is when everything clicks. She's not attracted to men she can control because controlled men don't feel masculine to her. Masculine energy is about direction, purpose, and yes, a certain untamability. When you become too predictable, too controllable, you're no longer playing the masculine role in the dynamic. The power testing isn't personal, it's biological. She's literally wired to seek out men whose frame she cannot break. So how do you create this uncontrollable energy? Start with response times. Don't respond immediately to every text. Live your life first, then respond when you have something meaningful to say. When she suggests plans, check your actual schedule before saying yes. Most importantly, develop what I call peaceful unavailability. This isn't about being rude or playing games. It's about having genuine priorities beyond her attention. Build a life so interesting that her validation becomes nice to have, not need to have. Remember, the goal isn't to control her, it's to become uncontrollable yourself. When you stop being moved by her every emotion, that's when she starts being moved by yours. This transformation starts with one simple shift. And if you want to master all 15 principles that make you unforgettable, make sure you're subscribed to Stoic Happy Soul for the complete breakdown. Point 2. Scarcity amplifies desire. Ever notice how Apple releases new iPhones? They don't flood the market. They create waiting lists, limited quantities, exclusive launches. People camp outside stores for days. Not because the phone is objectively better than what they have, but because it feels rare, exclusive, special. I learned this the hard way with Sarah. I used to make myself completely available to her. Morning texts, good-night calls, available every weekend. I thought I was being the perfect guy. But you know what happened. She started treating our conversations like background noise. My texts became as exciting as checking her email. Then I met Ryan, one of my coaching clients who had the opposite problem. He was so busy with his startup, his gym routine, his weekend hiking trips, that when women got his attention, it felt like winning something. He wasn't playing games. He genuinely had a full life. When he did text back, when he did make time for a date, it carried weight because it was genuinely limited. Here's what blew my mind. The same woman who would leave Ryan on, read for hours, would respond to his texts immediately. Why? Because his attention felt scarce, valuable, earned. Have you ever wondered why the busiest, most successful men often have women competing for their time? It's not just their success. It's that their time feels limited, precious, hard to get. When something feels rare, our brains automatically assign it higher value. I used to think this was shallow, But then I realized something profound. Scarcity isn't about manipulation. It's about having a life worth living that naturally creates boundaries. Welcome to what I call the attention economy. In our digital world, attention has become the most valuable currency, and just like any currency, its value is determined by supply and demand. When you give unlimited attention, always being the first to text, always being available, always saying yes to her plans, you're flooding the market with your currency. And what happens when there's too much of something? The value crashes. But here's where most guys get it wrong. They think scarcity means being cold, distant, or playing hard to get. That's not scarcity. That's just being fake. Real scarcity comes from genuine value and genuine boundaries. Think about it this way: if someone offered you unlimited access to your favorite restaurant, you'd probably get bored of it pretty quickly. But if that same restaurant only opened one day a week, suddenly every meal there feels special, memorable, worth planning for. This is when everything clicks about female psychology. Women aren't attracted to men who are always available because availability signals low value in her subconscious. It's not personal. It's how our brains are wired to assess worth. The ancient Stoics understood this perfectly. They taught that wanting what you already have is the key to contentment. But in relationships, having everything too easily kills the very desire that created attraction in the first place. The practical insight here: your attention should feel earned, not given. When you become genuinely scarce through having a purpose-driven life, you're not playing games. You're becoming someone worth chasing, ready to master the psychology that makes you irreplaceable. Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle will show you exactly why neediness destroys everything you've built. Point 3: neediness destroys attraction. Fundamentally, let me tell you about 2 clients I worked with last year. Both good-looking, successful guys. Both completely mystified by their dating results. First, there's Michael, software engineer, 6-figure salary, genuinely nice guy. But here's how his conversations went. He'd text, "Good morning, beautiful," every day at 7 a.m. If she didn't respond within an hour, he'd send a follow-up. "Hope you're having a great day." Then another, "Did I say something wrong?" By noon, he'd called twice and sent a meme to make her smile. When she finally replied with, "Hey, sorry, busy day," Michael would write a paragraph about how he completely understands and how amazing she is for working so hard. Sound familiar? Now contrast that with Alex. When Alex texted a woman, it was because he had something interesting to share or a specific plan to propose. "There's this jazz show downtown Saturday. You interested?" If she didn't respond, he went to the show anyway, with friends, and posted about how great it was. No follow-ups, no explanations, no emotional outbursts. Here's what happened. Michael's relationships lasted an average of 3 weeks before women became too busy to see him. Alex, women would drive across town to spend time with him. The difference Michael's neediness screamed, "My happiness depends on your response." Every text was a desperate bid for validation. Alex's communication said, "I have a full life, and you're welcome to join it." I used to be Michael. I thought more attention meant more attraction. But here's the brutal truth I learned. Neediness doesn't show love. It shows fear. Fear that you're not enough. Fear that she'll leave. Fear that without her attention, you'll disappear. Have you ever noticed how the moment you start needing someone's validation, they start pulling away? That's not coincidence. That's biology. So how do you recognize neediness in yourself? Here are the warning signs. You check if she's online after not responding to you. You feel anxious when she takes longer than usual to text back. You say yes to all her plans, even when they conflict with your own. You ask, "Are we okay?" whenever there's the slightest tension. The antidote isn't becoming cold, it's becoming complete. Start by building what I call internal abundance. Before texting her, ask yourself, am I texting because I have something valuable to share, or because I need a response to feel okay? Practical tip. Implement the one text rule. Send one text, then live your life until she responds. No follow-ups, no explanations, no checking her social media to see if she's ignoring you. Most importantly, develop interests and relationships outside of her. When your happiness comes from multiple sources, your work, your hobbies, your friendships, your personal growth, her attention becomes a nice addition, not a desperate need. This is when everything clicks. Confidence isn't about never wanting anything from someone else. It's about not needing their validation to feel whole. Ready to master the complete psychology that transforms you from needy to irresistible? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle reveals why emotional availability actually creates devaluation, and it's going to change everything. Point 4. Emotional availability creates devaluation. Here's the biggest lie we've been sold about relationships. Be emotionally available, and she'll appreciate you more. I believed this for years, and it cost me relationship after relationship. I used to think being the guy who always listened, who was always there for her emotional ups and downs, who never missed a call or text, made me the perfect partner. I was the shoulder to cry on, the voice of reason, the constant source of support. I thought this made me irreplaceable. But here's what actually happened. I became emotional wallpaper. Expected, predictable, taken for granted. Think about your own life for a second. What do you value more? The air you breathe, or a cold glass of water when you're dying of thirst? The air is literally keeping you alive every second, but you never think about it because it's always there. The water, you'd pay anything for it because you don't have access to it. That's exactly what happens when you're always emotionally available. You become the air, essential maybe, but completely invisible. She stops seeing your support as special because she never experiences life without it. I learned this the hard way when my ex told me, "You're too safe. I never wonder what you're thinking or feeling because you tell me everything." Have you ever been called too safe by someone you were trying to win over? It stings because you think safety should be attractive, but it's actually the opposite of desire. Here's where human psychology gets fascinating. Our brains are wired to notice what's different, what's changing, what requires our attention. It's called hedonic adaptation. We get used to things that are constantly available and stop appreciating them. But here's the deeper truth. Emotional availability without boundaries doesn't signal love. It signals desperation. When you're always available, always ready to drop everything for her emotions, you're unconsciously communicating that your time, your energy, your emotional state are less valuable than hers. Women are incredibly intuitive about power dynamics. When you make yourself constantly available, you're handing over all the power in the relationship. She doesn't have to wonder about your feelings because you share them all. She doesn't have to earn your attention because it's always freely given. The ancient Stoics understood this perfectly. They taught that your emotional state should be yours to control, not dependent on external circumstances or other people's needs. When you give someone unlimited access to your emotional world, you're violating this fundamental principle. This is when everything clicks. Attraction requires tension, and tension requires uncertainty. When someone knows they have complete access to your emotions, there's no tension left, no mystery, no challenge, no reason to pursue or wonder or work for your attention. It's not that women want men who are cold or unavailable. They want men who are emotionally intelligent enough to know when to engage and when to maintain their own center. So how do you become selectively available without being manipulative? Start with what I call emotional boundaries. Don't share every feeling, every thought, every reaction immediately. Create space between feeling something and expressing it. Practical tip. Before responding to her emotional state, ask yourself, is this the best time to engage, or should I maintain my center right now? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is not absorb her emotional chaos. Remember, being selective with your emotional energy isn't about being cold. It's about being valuable. When your emotional presence becomes something that's earned rather than expected, it transforms from commonplace to precious. Ready to discover why detachment is actually the ultimate power source? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because what comes next will completely flip your understanding of masculine energy. Point 5. Detachment is ultimate power source. This is where everything changes. True detachment isn't about being cold or distant. It's about being so internally complete that you don't need anyone else's approval to feel whole. I used to think power in relationships came from being needed. I thought if I could make myself indispensable, always available, always supportive, always giving, she'd never want to leave. But here's what I discovered after 5 years of studying: this real power comes from not needing to be needed. Think about the most magnetic people you know. They're not the ones desperately trying to impress everyone. They're the ones who seem comfortable in their own skin, who don't change their energy based on who's in the room. Have you ever met someone like that? There's something almost gravitational about them, isn't there? When you're truly detached, you operate from a place of abundance, not scarcity. You're not thinking, "I hope she likes me." You're thinking, "Let's see if we're compatible." That shift in perspective changes everything. Your body language, your voice, even the way you walk into a room. I remember working with a client named Tom who transformed this principle perfectly. Before, he'd rehearse conversations in his head, worry about saying the wrong thing, analyze every text for hours. After embracing detachment, he'd show up to dates genuinely curious about her, not anxious about impressing her. The result: women started calling him mysterious, confident, different from other guys. But he wasn't playing a character. He'd simply stopped needing their validation to feel good about himself. When you don't need someone's approval, paradoxically, you become more likely to get it. The ancient Stoics called this outcome independence, being so centered in your own worth that external results don't shake your inner peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Here's how this applies to modern relationships when you're outcome independent. You can engage authentically without attachment to results. You can ask her out without your self-worth hanging on her answer. You can express interest without needing it reciprocated to feel okay about yourself. This is when everything clicks about masculine energy. Women are attracted to men who have their own center, their own mission, their own source of happiness. When your emotional state depends on her responses, her moods, her attention, you're essentially making her responsible for your inner peace. That's not attractive. It's exhausting. Practical insight. Start each interaction from a place of, "I'm already complete. Anything that happens here is extra." This isn't about not caring. It's about caring from a position of strength rather than need. The Stoics taught that happiness comes from within, never from external circumstances. When you truly embody this, you become magnetic because you're offering something rare, a man who doesn't need fixing, doesn't need constant reassurance, doesn't need her to be different than she is. You become someone who enhances her life rather than needs her life to feel complete. And that, gentlemen, is the ultimate attractive quality. Ready to see how this detachment psychology gets even more powerful? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul. Because the next principle reveals exactly what happens when she tries to pull you back into the old dynamic, and why your response determines everything. Point 6. She will try to pull you back. Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something I wish someone had told me years ago. The moment you start detaching, the moment you stop being her emotional support system on demand, she's going to notice, and her response is going to test everything you've learned so far. It starts subtle. Maybe she sends you a random text. Saw this coffee shop we used to go to. Made me think of you. Or she'll share a memory. Remember that time we... These aren't innocent nostalgia trips. They're reconnaissance missions. She's checking if she still has emotional access to your heart. I used to fall for this every single time. I'd get that text and think, oh, she's thinking about me. Maybe she's realizing what she lost. So I'd respond with enthusiasm, pour my heart out, and guess what happened? Right back to being taken for granted. Have you ever noticed how women can sense the exact moment you start moving on? It's like they have radar for it. One client, Marcus, told me his ex hadn't contacted him in 3 months. But the week he started dating someone new, suddenly she's texting about closure and wanting to talk about things. Here's what's really happening when you detach. You disrupt her emotional script. She was used to having you as her backup plan, her ego boost, her emotional safety net. Now that safety net is gone, and it creates anxiety. But instead of admitting she misses your attention, she tests to see if she can still get it without risking her pride. The tests escalate if the subtle ones don't work. I'm going through a hard time right now. I could really use a friend. You're the only one who understands me. These aren't genuine requests for support. They're emotional fishing hooks designed to pull you back into the old dynamic. The most dangerous test, the vulnerability card. I've been thinking about us a lot lately. I think I made a mistake. These hit hardest because they seem like the breakthrough you've been waiting for. But here's the brutal truth. If she wanted you, really wanted you, she wouldn't need to test if you still want her first. So how do you handle these tests without being cruel or manipulative yourself? This is where Stoic wisdom becomes your superpower. First, recognize the test for what it is. When she reaches out after silence, ask yourself, is this genuine interest, or is she checking if I'm still emotionally available? Usually, it's the latter. Your response should be cordial but detached. Hope you're doing well instead of, I've missed you so much. Keep it short, keep it friendly. But don't take the bait. Don't ask follow-up questions. Don't try to extend the conversation. Don't offer solutions to problems she hasn't directly asked you to solve. The hardest part. Resist the urge to prove you've changed. When she tests, your instinct might be to show her how detached and confident you've become, but that's still seeking her validation, just in a different form. True detachment means her tests don't create anxiety in you. You're not wondering, is this my chance? You're thinking, interesting behavior, but I'm good either way. This is when everything clicks. The tests stop working when you stop needing to pass them. You become uncontrollable because you're genuinely unavailable emotionally, not because you're pretending to be. Ready to discover why uncertainty becomes your secret weapon? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle reveals the psychology behind why mystery drives her absolutely crazy, and how to use it ethically. Point 7. Uncertainty principle triggers obsession. This is where human psychology gets absolutely fascinating, and understanding this principle changed everything for me. Our brains are literally wired to fill in gaps, to solve puzzles, to create stories where information is missing. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. We remember incomplete tasks better than completed ones. Here's what happens when you introduce uncertainty into a relationship her mind can't let go. She starts creating mental loops trying to figure you out. I learned this the hard way with Jessica. For 2 years, I was completely predictable. She knew exactly how I'd respond to her texts, exactly what I'd say when she called, exactly how I'd react to her moods. There was no mystery, no question marks, no wondering. And slowly, I watched her interest fade because her brain had me completely figured out. But then I started studying behavioral psychology and discovered something incredible when there's uncertainty. The female mind goes into overdrive. Have you ever noticed how women can obsess over guys who are unpredictable, but lose interest in guys who are completely transparent? When you stop chasing, when you become harder to read, when your responses become less predictable, something powerful happens in her psychology. She starts asking questions. Why isn't he texting me back immediately anymore? What's he doing that's more important than talking to me? Did I do something wrong? Is he seeing someone else? These questions create what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, mental discomfort that demands resolution. Her brain literally can't handle the uncertainty, so it keeps cycling through possibilities, trying to solve the puzzle of you. I remember working with a client, David, who was going through this exact situation. When he stopped being available 24/7, his ex-girlfriend went from ignoring him to texting him random questions about his day, stalking his social media, asking mutual friends about his activities. She couldn't handle not knowing where she stood with him anymore. This is when everything clicks. The more predictable you are, the less mental real estate you occupy in her mind. But uncertainty makes you unforgettable because her brain can't file you away as solved. Now here's the crucial part. There's a massive difference between healthy uncertainty and manipulative games. Healthy uncertainty comes from genuinely having a rich, unpredictable life. Manipulative uncertainty comes from playing calculated mind games. Healthy uncertainty looks like this. You have hobbies, goals, and interests that don't revolve around her. Sometimes you're available, sometimes you're genuinely busy. Your responses vary based on your actual mood and circumstances, not based on some strategy to make her wonder. I used to make the mistake of being artificially mysterious, taking exactly 2 hours to respond to every text, pretending to be busy when I wasn't, creating fake scenarios to seem more interesting. That's not uncertainty, that's dishonesty, and women can sense it. Real uncertainty comes from having what I call authentic unpredictability. You respond when you genuinely have something to say. You make plans based on your actual schedule, not on what you think will create the right amount of mystery. You share some thoughts and keep others private because that's natural, not strategic. Practical tip: instead of planning your responses, plan your life. Fill your schedule with activities that genuinely interest you. When you're genuinely engaged with your own life, you naturally become less predictable in her world. The key insight here is that uncertainty should be a byproduct of your personal growth, not a tactic for manipulation. When you're constantly evolving, learning new things, pursuing new challenges, you naturally become harder to predict because you're literally becoming a different person. Remember, the goal isn't to confuse her, it's to intrigue her. Confusion creates frustration, but intrigue creates attraction. Ready to understand why this uncertainty makes her question everything about her own power? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle reveals the exact psychological shift that happens when she starts wondering if she was just a phase in your life, and why that thought becomes absolutely haunting for her. Point 8. She wonders if she was just a phase. This is where female psychology gets really deep, and understanding this principle literally saved my dating life. Every woman, whether she admits it or not, has a fundamental need to feel significant, to feel like she made an impact on the men in her life. Here's what I discovered after years of studying this when you were chasing her. Constantly available, always responding. You were actually feeding her ego in a very specific way. She knew exactly where she stood with you, at the center of your attention. Even if she didn't want you romantically, she enjoyed knowing she had that power over you. But the moment you detach, the moment that attention disappears, something fascinating happens in her mind. She starts questioning everything. Wait, did I even matter to him? Was I just some random girl he was talking to? Am I that forgettable? I remember working with a client named Jake, whose situation perfectly illustrates this. He'd been texting this woman daily for months, always initiating, always keeping the conversation going. When he finally stopped and focused on his own life, she didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. Then, out of nowhere, she sent him a long message. I've been thinking about our conversations, and I realized I might have taken you for granted. Have you ever noticed how women can go from barely acknowledging your existence to suddenly needing to know they mattered to you? That's not coincidence. That's ego protection. Here's the psychological truth her ego can't handle: the possibility that she was insignificant in your life. When you were chasing, she felt powerful, important, desired. Your silence forces her to confront a terrifying possibility. Maybe she wasn't as special to you as she thought. This is when everything clicks about female psychology. It's not that she necessarily wants you back. She wants to know she had an impact. She wants confirmation that she wasn't just another face in the crowd, that the attention you gave her meant something. The ego demands significance, and your detachment threatens that significance in a way that drives her absolutely crazy. Here's where the real transformation happens, and this blew my mind when I first understood it. When you detach completely, you undergo a metamorphosis in her mind. You stop being the guy who used to chase me and become something much more dangerous, the one who got away. This shift is everything. Before, when you were pursuing her, you represented safety, predictability, someone she could count on to always be there. You were her emotional backup plan, her ego boost, her reliable source of attention. But you weren't mysterious. You weren't challenging. You weren't someone she had to work for. But when you disappear from that role, when your attention becomes unavailable, something powerful happens. You become the question mark in her romantic history. What if I had given him a real chance? What if he was actually the right guy and I just didn't see it? I used to think this was shallow, but then I realized it's actually how our brains process value. We don't miss what we have. We miss what we lose. When your presence was guaranteed, it had no value. But when it becomes a memory, it suddenly becomes precious. One of my clients, Marcus, experienced this exact transformation. His ex went from treating him like a friend to calling him the most genuine guy she ever knew. But only after he'd completely moved on. She started telling mutual friends how special he was, how she should have appreciated him more. The practical insight here: your value in her mind is often inversely related to your availability. The less accessible you become, the more significant your memory becomes. This principle reveals a profound truth about human nature. We chase what retreats from us. By detaching, you're not losing her interest. You're creating it in a way that never existed when you were pursuing her. Ready to understand how this psychological shift creates an automatic mirroring effect? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle reveals why she'll start copying your energy, and how this changes the entire power dynamic between you. Point 9. Mirror effect activates automatically. This is where human psychology gets absolutely mind-blowing, and understanding this principle will change how you see every interaction forever. There's something called mirror neurons in our brains. They literally fire when we observe someone else's behavior, creating an unconscious urge to match their energy. when you finally detach, something fascinating happens. She starts mirroring your new energy. I discovered this completely by accident with my ex, Sarah. For months, I was the one always initiating conversations, always eager, always available. My energy was high, anxious, seeking. And guess what? Her energy was low, distant, uninterested. But the moment I detached, when I stopped chasing, stopped being immediately available, stopped matching her low energy with my high energy, something incredible happened. She started matching my pace. If I took a few hours to respond, she'd take a few hours. If I was brief and direct, she became brief and direct. Have you ever noticed how people unconsciously match the energy of the person they're interacting with? It's not a conscious choice. It's hardwired into our psychology. We mirror body language, speech patterns, even emotional states without realizing it. Here's the powerful part when you maintain detached, calm, confident energy. You're essentially forcing her to rise to your level. She can't help but match your vibe because that's how human connection works. Instead of you chasing her energy, she starts chasing yours. This is when everything clicks about power dynamics in relationships. Energy flows from high to low, just like water. When you were desperate, needy, always available, your energy was scattered and low. She felt that and responded with even lower energy. But when you become centered, grounded, detached, she has no choice but to match that higher frequency. The mirror effect isn't manipulation. It's natural human psychology working in your favor for once. Here's where most guys mess up everything they've built, and I used to make this mistake constantly. The moment she starts mirroring your energy, responding faster, being more engaged, showing more interest, your instinct is to think, finally it's working, and then you break. You see her matching your energy and think it's an invitation to go back to your old patterns. You start texting more, being more available, dropping your standards. But here's the brutal truth. Her mirroring isn't a green light to revert. It's a test to see if you'll maintain your new frame. I remember working with a client, Tom, who experienced this exact scenario. His ex started matching his detached energy, responding at the same pace, even asking him about his day. Tom got excited and immediately went back to his old self. Paragraphs of texts, constant availability, trying to win her over. Within a week, she was back to her old patterns too. The Stoic philosophers understood this perfectly. Marcus Aurelius wrote about maintaining your center regardless of external circumstances. When she mirrors your energy, that's not the time to celebrate. It's the time to stay consistent. Think about it this way: if you change your behavior every time she changes hers, you're still being reactive. You're still letting her control the dynamic. True detachment means your energy remains steady, whether she's mirroring you or not. The practical insight here: don't see her mirroring as success. See it as the new baseline. When she starts matching your energy, That's not the end of the process. It's the beginning of a new dynamic where you set the tone. The biggest mistake thinking her mirroring means you've won and can now relax your standards. The second biggest analyzing every interaction to see if she's still mirroring. Both of these break your detachment and put you back in reactive mode. Remember, consistency is everything. Whether she's mirroring your energy or not, your energy should remain the same. That's what makes you magnetic, your stability, not your ability to get her to match you. The goal isn't to get her to mirror you. The goal is to become someone whose energy is worth mirroring. Ready to discover how this mirroring leads to a complete reversal of control, subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul. Because the next principle reveals exactly how the power dynamics flip and why she'll never see you the same way again. Point 10. Control dynamics completely reverse. This is the moment everything changes, and I wish someone had explained this to me years ago. Up until now, she held all the power in the dynamic. She decided when to respond to your texts, when to make plans, when to give you attention. You were essentially dancing to her rhythm, reacting to her energy, living in her emotional world. But here's what happens when you truly detach. The entire power structure flips overnight. I remember the exact moment I experienced this with Rachel. For months, I was the one checking my phone constantly, hoping for her texts, analyzing her responses, adjusting my behavior based on her moods. She had complete emotional control over me, and honestly, I gave it to her willingly because I thought that's what love looked like. But when I finally detached, when I stopped needing her validation to feel good about myself, something incredible happened. Suddenly, she was the one checking if I'd seen her messages. She was the one initiating conversations. She was the one asking our mutual friends about my life. Have you ever experienced that shift where suddenly you're not the one chasing anymore? It's surreal because you realize how much mental energy you were wasting trying to control something that was never yours to control in the first place. Here's the psychological truth. Control in relationships isn't about who's more attractive or successful. It's about who needs the other person less. When you were chasing her, you needed her attention to feel valuable. That need gave her all the power. But when you detach, when you stop needing her responses to feel okay about yourself, the power naturally flows back to you. This is when everything clicks about masculine energy. True masculine power isn't about dominating someone else. It's about not being able to be dominated. When you become emotionally self-sufficient, when your happiness doesn't depend on her behavior, you become uncontrollable. And what she can't control, she starts to crave. The Stoics called this internal locus of control. Your emotional state depends on your choices, not external circumstances. When you embody this principle, you automatically become the center of gravity in any relationship. Here's where it gets really fascinating. When you detach completely, You don't just remove yourself from her emotional pull. You actually reverse the gravitational field. Instead of being pulled into her orbit, she starts getting pulled into yours. I used to think attraction was about pursuing, about showing interest, about proving your worth. But here's what 5 years of studying this taught me: attraction is actually about emotional gravity. And emotional gravity comes from being centered, grounded, unshakable. When you were chasing her, your emotional energy was scattered, reaching outward, seeking validation. That energy is repulsive because it communicates desperation. But when you detach, when you pull all that scattered energy back into yourself, you create what I call magnetic presence. Think about the most attractive people you know, not just physically, but magnetically attractive. They don't chase opportunities, friendships, or relationships. Opportunities, friendships, and relationships are drawn to them. Why? Because they've mastered the art of being centered. One of my clients, David, perfectly illustrates this transformation. Before detachment, he was constantly trying to get into her world, her interests, her friend group, her schedule. After detachment, she started trying to get into his world, asking about his hobbies, wanting to meet his friends, adjusting her schedule around his. The practical insight here: when you stop trying to pull her toward you, you naturally become someone she wants to move toward. It's not manipulation, it's physics, emotional physics. Here's the empowering truth: you don't need to change who you are to become attractive. You just need to stop scattering your energy and start containing it. When you become emotionally self-contained, you become irresistible, not because you're trying to be, but because centered energy is naturally magnetic. Ready to discover how this power shift makes you completely irreplaceable? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle reveals why women can never forget men who've mastered the art of detachment, and how you become the standard everyone else gets measured against. Point 11: you become the one she can't replace. This is where the long-term impact of detachment becomes absolutely life-changing. And I need you to really understand what I'm about to share. When you truly master detachment, you don't just become attractive, you become irreplaceable. And there's a massive difference. Here's what I discovered after working with hundreds of men: attention is everywhere. Guys who will text her constantly, buy her things, be available 24/7, they're a dime a dozen. But a man who has genuinely mastered himself, that's rare as gold. I used to think being irreplaceable meant being perfect, being the most handsome, the richest, the funniest. But here's the truth that changed everything for me: irreplaceable men aren't perfect, they're complete. They don't need external validation to feel whole. They don't change who they are based on who they're with. What makes you unforgettable isn't your ability to give her everything she wants. It's your ability to maintain your center, regardless of what she does. Have you ever met a man who just seemed unshakable, who remained calm during chaos, confident during uncertainty, centered during emotional storms? That's magnetic at a primal level. The irreplaceable man has what I call authentic consistency. He's the same person whether he's alone, with friends, or with her. His values don't shift based on circumstances. His energy doesn't depend on external responses. His self-worth isn't negotiable. I remember my client, Robert, who transformed from a people-pleaser into someone truly irreplaceable. The shift wasn't about becoming cold or distant. It was about becoming so grounded in his own worth that he couldn't be moved by manipulation, drama, or emotional games. Here's the powerful insight when you become emotionally self-sufficient. You offer something that most men can't: stability. Not just financial stability, but emotional stability. The kind of steady presence that makes a woman feel safe to be vulnerable, knowing you won't be shaken by her emotions or overwhelmed by her needs. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part that will blow your mind. When you become truly irreplaceable, you don't just attract her. You become the standard by which she measures every other man for the rest of her life. Think about this: every relationship she has after you, she'll be comparing to what you offered. Not just the surface stuff, the way you made her feel, the level of emotional maturity you displayed, the unshakable confidence you embodied. I've seen this happen countless times. Women who initially took these men for granted later realize what they lost. Years later, they are still talking about that one guy who was different. Not because he chased them or spoiled them, but because he represented something rare. A man who knew his worth and lived accordingly. This creates what psychologists call reference point bias. You become her reference point for what a real man looks like. Every guy who comes after has to measure up to the standard you set. And here's the thing: most won't be able to. Have you ever noticed how certain people from your past still influence how you see others? That's the power of becoming someone's standard. You're not just a memory. You're a measuring stick. The what-if thoughts this creates are incredibly powerful. What if I had appreciated him more? What if he was actually the one? What if I never find someone like that again? These thoughts don't just appear once. They resurface during every disappointing relationship that follows. This is when everything clicks about true masculine value. You're not trying to be better than other men. You're focused on being the best version of yourself. And paradoxically, that focus makes you naturally superior in her mind. Ready to understand how this standard setting creates permanent psychological impact? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle reveals the benchmark effect that makes you literally unforgettable, living in her mind rent-free for years to come. Point 12. Benchmark effect establishes permanence. This is where the psychology gets absolutely fascinating, and understanding this principle will show you just how powerful true detachment really is. When you master the art of emotional independence, something incredible happens in her mind. You don't just become a memory. You become permanent mental real estate. Here's what I discovered after years of studying this. Most relationships fade from memory because they follow predictable patterns. But when you represent something she's never experienced before, a man who couldn't be controlled, manipulated, or emotionally moved, you create what psychologists call cognitive permanence. I learned this through my client, Jason's experience. 3 years after he'd completely detached from his ex, she was still bringing him up in conversations with mutual friends. Not because she wanted him back, but because she couldn't stop comparing every new relationship to the standard he'd set. Have you ever noticed how certain people from your past still influence your current decisions? That's exactly what happens when you become someone's benchmark. The reason you live rent-free in her mind isn't because you were perfect. It's because you were authentic. You didn't change yourself to fit her expectations. You didn't sacrifice your values to avoid conflict. You didn't become smaller to make her feel bigger. This level of consistency is so rare that it creates permanent psychological impact. Think about it this way: she's used to men who react, who get emotional, who can be predicted and controlled. But you remained centered during her storms, confident during her tests, unavailable during her attempts to pull you back. That's not just attractive, it's unforgettable. The psychological truth is this: we remember what we can't understand more than what we can. Your detachment created a puzzle her mind can't solve. And unsolved puzzles stay active in our subconscious indefinitely. You become the question she never got to fully answer, and that keeps you permanently relevant in her mental landscape. But here's where it gets really powerful. And this is the part that transforms you from just another guy she dated to the standard every other man has to live up to. When you become someone's benchmark, you don't just set the bar, you become the bar. Every man she meets after you gets automatically compared to your emotional maturity, your unshakable confidence, your ability to remain centered under pressure. And here's the brutal truth. For them, most men will never measure up because they don't understand what you understood about masculine energy. I remember working with a client whose ex told him, years later, "I realize now that you were showing me what a real man looked like, and I wasn't ready to see it." That's the benchmark effect in action. You become the template for what she wishes she could find again. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to ruin everyone else for their exes? It's not because they were perfect. It's because they demonstrated a level of self-mastery that becomes the new standard. Your grounded presence, your emotional intelligence, your refusal to be moved by drama. These qualities become the measuring stick for every future relationship. This is when everything clicks about long-term impact. You're not trying to be better than other men. You're focused on being the best version of yourself. But that authenticity naturally makes you superior in her memory, because authentic, self-possessed men are incredibly rare. The practical insight here: when you stop trying to impress and start trying to express your genuine self, you automatically become impressive. Your authenticity becomes their standard, and that standard follows them into every future relationship. Ready to discover how emotional distance creates an almost magnetic curiosity that she can never quite shake? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle reveals why strategic emotional boundaries make you absolutely irresistible, and how to create them without playing games. Point 13. Magnetic emotional distance creates curiosity. This is where mastery-level psychology meets real-world attraction, and what I'm about to share will completely transform how you think about emotional intimacy. Most men believe that sharing everything, every thought, every feeling, every experience, creates closeness. But here's the counterintuitive truth. Emotional distance creates curiosity, and curiosity drives attraction far more powerfully than familiarity ever could. There's something psychologists call the gap effect. Our brains are literally wired to fill in missing information. When there's a gap in our knowledge, our minds become obsessed with filling it. I learned this the hard way with Emma. I used to tell her everything, my daily struggles, my fears, my dreams, my random thoughts throughout the day. I thought this was emotional intimacy. But what actually happened? She stopped asking questions. She stopped being curious about my inner world because she already had complete access to it. Have you ever noticed how people lose interest in books they've already read, but can't stop thinking about books they've only read halfway through? That's exactly what happens when you give someone unlimited emotional access. You satisfy their curiosity. And once curiosity is satisfied, the psychological tension that creates attraction disappears. Here's where it gets fascinating when you maintain emotional distance, not coldness, but selectivity. You create what I call productive mystery. She starts wondering, what's he thinking about? What happened in his past that shaped him? What are his deeper fears and dreams? I remember working with Marcus, who transformed his dating life by simply stopping the emotional oversharing. Instead of telling women his entire life story on the first date, he'd share one interesting detail and let them wonder about the rest. The result? They started asking more questions, initiating deeper conversations, trying to solve the puzzle of who he really was. This is when everything clicks about masculine magnetism. You're not hiding who you are. You're being selective about when and how you reveal yourself. You're making your emotional world something to be earned, not freely given. But here's where most guys get this wrong, and I used to make this mistake constantly. They think emotional distance means being cold, mysterious, or playing hard to get. That's not strategic emotional boundaries. That's just being fake. Real emotional distance is about having standards for emotional intimacy. Just like you wouldn't give your house keys to someone you just met. You shouldn't give unlimited access to your emotional world to someone who hasn't earned it. The Stoics understood this perfectly. They taught that your inner world is your most precious possession, and you should guard it accordingly. When you share your deepest thoughts and feelings with someone who hasn't demonstrated they're worthy of that trust, you're essentially devaluing your own emotional currency. Here's the practical approach. Engage authentically, but selectively. Share one layer at a time. Let her curiosity about the next layer drive her to invest more in getting to know you. Have you ever noticed how the most attractive people seem to have depth that you can't quite reach? That's not because they're playing games. It's because they have genuine boundaries. I learned this from observing truly confident men. They don't share their vulnerabilities with just anyone. They don't explain their every decision. They don't justify their choices to people who haven't earned the right to understand them. The practical insight here: your emotional world should be like a private club, exclusive, valuable, and something people have to qualify for. When women have to earn access to your deeper thoughts and feelings, that access becomes precious rather than expected. Remember, you're not withholding to manipulate. You're being selective to maintain value. Your emotional intimacy becomes a gift rather than a given, and gifts are always more appreciated than expectations. Ready to discover how this strategic unavailability creates the ultimate attraction paradox? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because the next principle reveals why the less available you become, the more desirable you get, and it's going to blow your mind. Point 14, unavailability sparks deeper desire. This principle separates the masters from the amateurs, and understanding the difference between true unavailability and fake scarcity will transform everything about how women see you. Most guys think unavailability means playing hard to get, ignoring texts on purpose, or pretending to be busy when they are not. That's not unavailability, that's manipulation, and women can smell it from a mile away. True unavailability comes from genuinely having a life so rich, so purposeful, so engaging that her attention becomes nice to have, not need to have. I learned this the hard way with Jessica. For months, I tried the fake scarcity approach, waiting exactly 2 hours to respond to every text, pretending I had plans when I didn't, acting mysterious when I was actually just confused about what to do next. But here's what happened. She saw right through it. Women have incredible intuition about authentic versus artificial behavior. Have you ever tried to fake confidence and had it backfire? That's because authenticity has an energy that can't be replicated. Real unavailability looks completely different. It's when you're genuinely excited about your work project and lose track of time. It's when you're at the gym pushing yourself to new limits. It's when you're learning a new skill that genuinely fascinates you. It's when you're building something that matters to you more than any individual relationship. I remember working with Alex, who was struggling with this concept. The breakthrough came when he stopped trying to seem unavailable and started becoming genuinely unavailable through pursuing his passion for photography. Suddenly, when he did text women, it carried weight because his attention was genuinely limited and valuable. This is when everything clicks about desire. Psychology, we want what feels rare and genuine, not what feels artificially scarce. When your unavailability comes from having a mission, a purpose, something bigger than dating that drives you, women don't just respect it, they're attracted to it at a primal level. Here's where mission-driven masculinity becomes your ultimate advantage. And this principle alone will separate you from 90% of men she's ever met. When you have a life bigger than her, bigger than any individual relationship, you embody something that triggers deep, feminine attraction, purposeful masculine energy. Think about the most attractive men throughout history. They weren't attractive because they chased women. They were attractive because they were chasing something meaningful. Building empires, creating art, solving problems, mastering skills, serving causes. Women were drawn to them because they represented something bigger than just romantic connection. I used to think having a life bigger than her meant being cold or dismissive. But here's what 5 years of studying this taught me: it's actually the opposite. When you have a genuine mission, you can love more fully because you're not needy. You can give more authentically because you're not depleted. You can be present more completely because you're not anxious about the relationship. Have you ever noticed how women talk about men who have their own thing going on? They're not talking about hobbies or side projects. They're talking about men who have a sense of purpose that exists independently of female validation. The practical insight here is profound. When your happiness comes from your mission, your growth, your contribution to the world, relationships become enhancement rather than necessity. And paradoxically, that's when you become most attractive to high-quality women. Your unavailability isn't a strategy to make her want you more. It's a natural byproduct of living a life worth living. When you're genuinely building something meaningful, when you're genuinely growing, when you're genuinely contributing, you naturally become someone whose time and attention carry weight. Ready to discover the final principle that creates permanent psychological impact? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because what comes next reveals the obsession cycle that makes you literally unforgettable, and how detachment becomes your ultimate superpower. Point 15. Obsession cycle becomes self-perpetuating. This is the final piece of the puzzle, and it's the most powerful psychological effect you'll ever understand about detachment. When you truly master emotional independence, you don't just become attractive, you become permanently embedded in her psychological landscape. You literally take up residence in her mind, rent-free, sometimes for years. Here's what happens when you detach completely. Her mind starts running what psychologists call rumination loops. She can't stop wondering what she had, what she broke, and what she'll never touch again. Have you ever had a song stuck in your head that you couldn't shake? That's exactly what happens when you become psychologically unavailable to someone who once had access to you. I learned this through my client David's experience. 2 years after he'd completely detached from his ex, she was still bringing him up in therapy sessions, not because she wanted him back, but because she couldn't stop wondering, what if I had appreciated him? Why couldn't I see what I had? Will I ever find someone like that again? The psychological thrill of the chase becomes genuinely addictive for her. Her brain releases dopamine every time she thinks about you because you represent an unresolved puzzle. Think about it. When was the last time you obsessed over someone who was completely predictable and available? Never. We obsess over what we can't have, can't control, can't fully understand. This is when everything clicks about the ultimate power of detachment. You're not trying to make her obsess. You're simply living at such a high standard of emotional independence that her mind can't categorize you with other men. You become the exception, the anomaly, the one who got away. The men who master this principle become what I call psychological legends. They live in her mind as the standard that nobody else can reach. She doesn't just remember you, she measures every future relationship against the emotional maturity you demonstrated. But here's where this principle becomes truly life-changing, and this is bigger than any individual relationship. The obsession cycle doesn't just affect her, it transforms you into someone fundamentally different. When you master detachment, you transcend the need for external validation and become genuinely self-sufficient. I used to tie my self-worth to how women responded to me. Every text, every look, every reaction determined how I felt about myself that day. But when I finally embraced true detachment, something incredible happened. I stopped needing anyone else's approval to feel complete. The transcendent impact goes beyond dating. You become a man who can't be moved by drama, manipulation, or emotional games. You develop what the Stoics called ataraxia, unshakable inner peace. Have you ever met someone who seemed immune to the chaos around them? That's the power of mastered detachment. This transformation creates ripple effects in every area of your life. Your career improves because you're not seeking validation from colleagues or bosses. Your friendships deepen because you're not needy or codependent. Your family relationships heal because you're not trying to fix or control anyone. But most importantly, you become attractive at a level that transcends physical appearance, money, or status. You radiate the rare energy of a man who is complete within himself. And that energy, that centered, grounded, unshakable presence, is what creates lasting psychological impact. The practical insight here is profound when you stop chasing external validation and start building internal worth. You naturally become someone worth chasing. You're not playing games or using strategies. You're embodying the qualities that make you genuinely unforgettable. This is mastery. This is the ultimate expression of masculine energy. This is how you become someone they can't forget, can't replace, and can't stop thinking about. Ready to join the brotherhood of men who've mastered themselves? Subscribe to Stoic Happy Soul, because your transformation into an unforgettable man starts now. Gentlemen, we've just walked through 15 life-changing principles that will completely transform how women see you, and more importantly, how you see yourself. But these aren't just random tips or tricks. They're a complete psychological framework that turns you from the guy who chases into the man who's chased. Think about the journey we've taken together. We started with understanding why she craves what she can't control, learned how scarcity amplifies desire, and discovered why neediness destroys everything you're trying to build. We explored how emotional availability actually creates devaluation, why detachment is your ultimate power source, and how to handle her attempts to pull you back into old patterns. Have you ever wondered why some men seem to effortlessly attract respect and admiration, while others struggle despite trying so hard? It's because they understand these psychological principles, whether consciously or not. We dove deep into the response patterns, how uncertainty triggers obsession, why she starts wondering if she was just a phase, and how the mirror effect automatically activates when you maintain your frame. We witnessed the complete reversal of control dynamics and understood how you become the one she can't replace. Then we reached mastery level, discovering how magnetic emotional distance creates curiosity, why unavailability sparks deeper desire, and how the obsession cycle becomes self-perpetuating. Each principle builds on the last, creating a compound effect that transforms you into someone unforgettable. This isn't about manipulation or playing games. This is about embodying authentic masculine energy, being emotionally self-sufficient, grounded in your purpose, and unshakable in your worth. When you integrate these 15 principles, you don't just change your dating life. You change your entire existence. The man who masters detachment doesn't chase because he doesn't need to. He becomes the prize, the standard, the benchmark that every other man gets measured against. And that transformation starts with the decision to stop seeking external validation and start building internal worth. But here's what I really want you to understand. This journey goes far beyond attracting women. This is about becoming an unshakable man of value, someone who commands respect in every area of life, someone who can't be moved by chaos, drama, or external circumstances. I used to tie my entire self-worth to how women responded to me. Every text message felt like a lifeline. Every rejection felt like death. I was living as an emotional hostage to external validation. But that's not strength. That's weakness disguised as caring. True mastery is about building your foundation so solid that nothing can shake it. When you embrace these principles of detachment, you develop what the Stoics called ataraxia, unshakable inner peace. You become the calm in the storm, the rock that others lean on. Have you ever noticed how the most magnetic leaders aren't the loudest or most desperate for attention. They're the ones who carry themselves with quiet confidence, who speak with conviction, who make decisions from a place of centeredness rather than fear. This transformation ripples through every aspect of your life. Your career improves because you're not seeking approval from bosses or colleagues. Your friendships deepen because you're not needy or codependent. Your family relationships heal because you're not trying to control or fix everyone. You become a man who attracts success, respect, and genuine connection, not because you're chasing these things, but because you embody the qualities that naturally draw them. You develop emotional intelligence, resilience, and the rare ability to remain grounded when everyone else is losing their minds. This is the ultimate expression of masculine energy, not toxic, not dominating, but centered and purposeful. When you master yourself, you don't need to master anyone else. When you become complete within yourself, you naturally become someone others want to be around. This is your invitation to step into that power, to become the man you were always meant to be. Before you go, I want to extend a personal invitation to join something special, the Stoic Happy Soul Brotherhood. This isn't just a YouTube channel, it's a movement of men committed to mastering themselves and living with uncompromising purpose. When you subscribe and engage with this community, you're not just getting content. You're joining a brotherhood that will hold you accountable, challenge you to grow, and support you through every stage of your transformation. Whether you're just starting this journey or you've been walking this path for years, you'll find the advanced strategies, real talk, and genuine connection you need. I want you to comment below with your biggest takeaway from these 15 principles. Share your story, your struggles, your victories. Let's build a space where vulnerability meets strength, where growth is celebrated, and where men become legends. Remember, transformation doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in community, with brothers who understand the journey because they're walking it too. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for the next level of your evolution. Welcome to Stoic Happy Soul, where strength meets wisdom and ordinary men become extraordinary. Your transformation starts now. Let's build something incredible together.